feels very strange back here.
Yeah, and on the Eldonna side.
I'm at wrong side of the track.
Yeah, it's not here.
Hi, how are you?
Come and sit with us.
Hi.
What was the news?
lose the keys? Yeah, I just saw one.
Somebody's losing.
Thank you.
Well, there's two ways of the tree. Congratulations on your retirement. It's all over the internet. Well, Beth, why don't you sit right behind? I was going to write these, but you know how they're going for 6 o'clock? Remember that one time? Well, that's So maybe say, come at 6, we'll go to 7 or 7:15, and plan to go to the conference after the meeting. And she's doing us. Just defer. I don't do big sports. I don't, you don't have to be sorry. By the way, you get it. Neither did we, but she got it. I know, I'm saying, what am I shocked with? Would you do that? I mean, God part of the song. We like it. But you're not inviting me to Marshall. I'm inviting you. Maybe the weekend. I mean, you don't want to do it. You got 15. Because then it becomes,
That's their house.
But I was thinking about it. Because I mean, he really wants juice.
Good, now I can be really intimidated because Jackie's here.
All right. Hello. Hi, everyone. I almost said Shabbat Shalom, but I did not. but it's so nice to be with such a warm and amazing group on this Thursday evening. I hope everybody is having a great day, and welcome, whether you're here with us often or whether this is the first time you've ever been to TBE, and also to anyone that's joining us on the stream. We really appreciate it. Personally, I'm very thrilled to have an interfaith pride program. In a world where we witness a growing assault on those on the margins and indeed vulnerable communities in general, it's more important than ever that we as a community, and I mean a Madison community, respond loudly and proudly. And I'd say this gathering is even extra essential this year as we hear growing messages in our country and even by the leaders of our country about exclusion and rejection, that we aspire to create a powerful community of solidarity, of friendship, and justice. So tonight's gathering as a community, we mark our unwavering support of LGBTQ people within our shared community. This evening is a sacred space. It was intentional that we had this conversation in our sanctuary rather than in our social hall, where we can affirm one another, a place where hearts and minds can connect. And so tonight we're here to hear stories, to listen to lived experiences that will undoubtedly inspire, challenge, potentially trouble, and no doubt deepen our understanding. We have the unique opportunity to learn from our diverse clergy, who I've gotten to know over the last month and I've really appreciated, and whose wisdom and guidance will illuminate the path forward. On a personal level, my hope for this is, one, just to learn and hear stories, which I always think is a core to who I want to be as a rabbi, a place where stories are told, but also to build vital interfaith relationships. As still a newbie in this town, to think about, I really believe that the depth of the relationship is the opportunity for action. And so whether it's with First Congregational UCC or First Baptist Church of Madison, these are no doubt partners in my mind of who we want to be as we create the city that we aspire to be in. And I'm really touched that longtime TBE member, and many of you know her super well, Rabbi Paula Winnig, will moderate this conversation. Just housekeeping, Paula's going to be in dialogue, and then at the end, or in a little bit, I'll take a microphone, or Stephanie will take, or Lisa will take a microphone around, and we'll have some opportunities for Q&A. When it's Q&A, we'll remind you that we don't need 61 votes for this, so we'll ask you to be as brief as possible in the questioning, so we can hear from our amazing panelists. So, and then I'll just plug that this Friday night at TBE, our Shabbat services are in Olbrich Park on the east side, but the following Friday night, basically 8 days from now, will be our Pride Shabbat services here at Bethel. All right, you have a microphone.
I do indeed. Can you hear me? Okay, good. So good evening. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for our panelists, and thank you to Rabbi Prosnit for inviting me to moderate this panel. I will say up front that having been here a month ago when we had another kind of moderated panel with the incredible Jackie Judd speaking with the incredible Aaron Gleason, this was a little intimidating. Sermons are one thing, but following Jackie Judd is a whole nother experience. So I thought we would start with a reading. A few years ago, this book called Where Pride Dwells, Mishkan Ge'eva, came out as a supplement to the celebrations of LGBTQ people's lives in Jewish rituals. And there's some beautiful readings in here. You've seen some of them before. But I thought we should start. Since we're a prayerful people, and we want to bring this to the religious perspectives, that we'd start with a reading from this book. This is a poem called Rainbow by Kevin Johnson. It was written in 2009. When I see a rainbow on the flag flying from the lamppost, fluttering in the Pacific breeze, I know that God made a covenant between us. If we lived our lives in black and white, we would never see that promise God made. To see all these colors together reminds me that God is there for you and me. So we decided that we would start this evening with having each of our panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment, give you a few minutes of some things that they think it would be important for you to know about them. But I will give you their basic biographies first. Reverend Tim Schaefer is the senior pastor at First Baptist Church of Madison. He'll tell you a little bit about the story that got him there. But I asked all of our panels a really important question if you live in Wisconsin, which is, what is your favorite ice cream? So Reverend Tim Schaefer said that his favorite ice cream was cookies and cream. Next to Reverend Schaefer, we have Reverend Eldonna Hazen. She uses he, her pronouns. Reverend Schaefer uses he, him pronouns. And her favorite ice cream is butter pecan. And she is the senior pastor at the First Congregational United Church of Christ. And finally, we have our very beloved Temple Bethel Cantor Jacob Niemi, who has survived now many winters here, even having come here from Florida by way of New York. And his favorite ice cream is chocolate chip cookies, cookie dough ice cream, right? Chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream. As you all know, besides being this amazing person that he is, he's also a talented composer of liturgical music and brings us great joy in all that we do here at Temple Bethel. So this is our panel, and we're going to start first, I think, by organizational privilege. We'll start first with Cantor Niemi to give his brief introduction.
Use the microphone.
Yes.
I'm so used to having the headset. It becomes like second nature, but this is absolutely lovely. It's such an honor and a privilege to be able to share this space with colleagues and to have what I hope will be a really wonderful and rich conversation about the intersections of queer and spiritual identity. I think for me, growing up as a kid in Florida in the 90s, and I realized that everyone has then a reaction to how I age myself in that moment and compares themselves to how I'm aging myself in that moment. But growing up in Florida in the 90s, this was just, queer identity was just something that was not spoken about. There were certainly images, that were available in public media, but for my own self, I didn't really have any role models, not just role models of people who were like people of faith who were queer, but just even people who were queer at all. The only representations that I saw of LGBTQ people of any kind were caricatures in TV shows, or maybe like one or two people who were out in high school who fit into some of those, what I saw as stereotypes. And not seeing myself in those, either those representations I saw in media or people that I happened to be aware of in my life, I assumed that if I didn't fit those stereotypes, then I must not be gay. And that my social lackings or journey were related to something else entirely, must be. And so I actually came out relatively late, not until college. And it was a really meaningful, like to have that kind of sense of self-discovery in a place that was really well supported by friends. My roommate for part of college was part of the LGBTQ community, and we were able to really bond. And I was really fortunate that my family was incredibly supportive. I'm sorry, I'm just remembering some of the moments. I came up to my mother in a parking lot at a grocery store, and the image just like came to my mind in that moment just then. But I didn't really figure out things about the intersection of my spiritual and religious identity until much later in my adulthood, when I was already well into seminary. I became really involved at the LGBTQ synagogue in New York, and I think of that time of my life as almost like a second adolescence. Not necessarily in the social sense, but really also just like in the growing up sense, where I was able to interact with queer elders for the first time in my life and have a sense of history and of my history, to talk to people who went through the AIDS crisis, or who were at Stonewall, or who were navigating trans healthcare in New York in the 80s. And figuring out how, for me, and I wrote about this not too long ago in some bulletin article for Temple Bethel, that slowly my Judaism started to become very queer, and my queerness started to become very Jewish, and they started to integrate in ways that I found rich and exciting and holistic, and the pieces of myself started to knit together. And the first time that I was called to the Torah with my title Cantor was at the LGBTQ synagogue. And I consider it as much of a home as anywhere. So I'm constantly learning and growing, but bringing that queer lens to my faith and to provide the opportunity, the entryway for others to do the same has been one of the richest parts of my cantorate.
Reverend Schaefer.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Yes, great. A lot of what you said resonates with me, also having grown up in the 90s, though in a very rural town in Pennsylvania, maybe not so different from Florida, culturally perhaps. And my dad just retired last year. He was for about 25 years was a United Methodist pastor. And so I grew up in the church, in the United Methodist Church. In the 90s, the United Methodist Church as a denomination was going through very public conversations about human sexuality. And I internalized a lot of that, and actually that brought me to the brink of suicide. I ended up being able to, find some comfort in some of the friendships that I had, and I came out about the middle of high school, and that was sort of, I think, life-saving for me to have some sort of support, not knowing how my parents would react and not wanting to come out to them. Ultimately, it sort of trickled through my school, and then from friends to parents, and then I was actually outed by a friend's parent who called my parents out of concern. And so that was not a great experience. It was very isolating, and the source of my trauma ultimately was the church. I didn't step foot in a church for about 10 years when I went off to college, but ultimately found a church that was affirming. And so what I like to say is the church was both the source of my trauma, and yet also a source that helped me kind of mend that trauma and embrace my identity. And so I have this, I guess it's okay maybe to say, a love-hate relationship with the church. Sometimes that's how it feels anyway. I hope that's not too controversial. Those of you from First Baptist, please don't bring that back and share that too widely. But I sort of went, traveled around a bit. I escaped to the big city of Boston to attend school, and then seminary in Texas, of all places, and found this really lovely congregation in Madison, which is Baptist. And I want to maybe just say a word about what it means to be Baptist, because I think some of you may be thinking, a queer Baptist pastor? I am not the only one, believe it or not. Baptists are not so dissimilar from Congregationalists. In fact, that is sort of our polity, or the way that we're structured, is that each individual congregation has a lot of autonomy. And so we have a wide range of theologies represented under various Baptist umbrellas. And I think what comes to mind most when people say Baptist is the loudest voices in the room, which are Southern Baptists, right? But we, my congregation is American Baptist and also affiliated with another group, the Alliance of Baptists. They tend to be a bit more open and a bit more progressive in their theology. And so we are probably also still a liberal outlier even within our own denomination, but there is that wide range. And so I hope that explanation helps a little bit because you may have been curious about that. So I'm really glad to be here. I'm really grateful for my colleagues here who are embracing interfaith work. This is not my first time here. I was in this space before when you all hosted one of the Trans Day of Remembrance services. First Baptist has been active with that as well, and we are very, very grateful for that partnership, and Jacob for our friendship. And so thank you so much for having us. Glad to be here, and thank you for coming.
And Reverend Hazen.
You both make me feel so young. Thank you. I was growing in the 90s, but I was a little older probably than you two. First of all, thank you for being here, because it's important for you to be here and for you to listen and to be empowered yourself to do work in the community. So thank you for being here. I came out much later in my life. I was in my late 30s, early 40s before I came out to, there were people that knew, but as far as coming out, I knew something was different when I was in high school, and was pretty sure that God made a mistake. And I just thought, well, we'll live with it. We'll figure it out. But just carried on. I grew up Lutheran, and then I went to college, and I felt this call to ministry my freshman year in college, and knew that was never going to happen. The Lutheran Church would never have even had a conversation, let alone embraced any possibility of that. So I went on about my way. I taught high school and middle school music in Nebraska. I grew up in Nebraska, a town of 500. I don't know what small means to you guys, but actually, when I was there, we never reached 500. We were like at 489. It was a big goal. They've reached it now. But, and so I taught and lived a very silent, closeted life, but then came out later to my parents and family and friends, and was the best decision I ever made because I could fully live into myself. I had a second profession of running a deli bakery in Nebraska, which I started and had that for 10 years. And then a minister that I had that was United Methodist, but on the progressive side of United Methodist, said, Eldonna, why are you not in seminary? And so at that point, I had been in a committed relationship. We called it a union back in those days that we did in the church, in that Methodist church, and we had bouncers at the door because we had people that were standing outside the church looking in to see what was going on. But I finally made the decision to go to seminary with a 1-year-old, and haven't looked back. Next year we will have been together for 30 years. We have 3 kids, and found this community and grateful for the United Church of Christ, which is even more scattered in their polity, because you could walk into First Cong, and many of you have, and it would be very progressive, and you could go to another United Church of Christ, and it would be very conservative. That's just how our polity works, because every congregation has their own autonomy and can make their own decisions. So it's been a journey, and what I feel called to do is make sure that everybody else's journey is not as hard.
So earlier this week, I had the opportunity to speak with each of our panelists individually. And one of the things that was fascinating, which you've alluded to, but I want to circle back to it, is what living your truth as out ministers, cantors, clergy, what that has meant for you in how it represents your own faith and what you feel your message and your ministry is. Could you start with Eldonna this time?
Well, I kind of ended by saying I feel like that's what my ministry is, but not just LGBTQIA+. It's everybody who gets pushed to the fringes. I just happen to feel it in a way, in the way I felt it. But one of the things that I think I feel so called to do is not separate your faith from who you are. Because that's what happens so much, is that, okay, if you are a member of the LGBTQI community, then you can't be in a faith community. I mean, that's what the world tells you. That's what the loudest voices in the world, those can't match. And so I hope in my ministry, I can say, not only, but you are welcome and you have something to share with us in our faith journeys, whether you're straight, gay, lesbian, bi, trans, whatever it is, your faith journey influences my faith journey. So that's what I hope that I can do in my best days.
Cantor Niemi?
I would align really strongly with what you just shared. I think about this sometimes in the context of studying scripture, of studying Torah. One of my favorite rabbinic interpretations of the revelation at Sinai is that it's a combo. It's really two, but that combines for me speak really powerfully to this is that that all of us were actually standing at Sinai together, all the generations from then until now and on into the future, and that each person heard the revelation according to their own strength, to their own capacity, and therefore the revelation is actually ongoing, still in progress, and requires all of us, all of our perspectives, all of our uniqueness, before it could ever be complete, which it won't be until, the world to come. And so when we have voices that are excluded from the conversation, then all of a sudden the picture of the divine becomes fractured or partial or incomplete. And it's been so moving for me to bring my own perspectives, but also to encourage people to bring all their full selves into their spiritual lives. That to the point that you were making, Eldonna, that the spiritual life should inform all of the other parts of ourselves and vice versa. It's been a rich area of growth for me, and it's been really a privilege to be able to do that work with others, regardless of what those full selves or full identities are, right? Whether it's for queer part of ourselves, or if somebody who, for example, is perhaps disabled or experiences other kinds of marginalizations, or really any part of our identity at all, our age, our gender, all of those are rich areas to further reveal holiness in the world.
Reverend Schaefer.
I'm really not sure what to add to that. Other than, I think, even in our faith tradition, we do acknowledge that and believe, many of us believe that every person is made in the image of the divine. And so you are created to be you. You are intentionally knit together in the womb the way that you are. And so I think even besides just LGBTQIA people, I mean, all people, regardless of, your cultural background or race or any ethnicity or identity, you are loved by God. And we are called to love our neighbors as ourselves, and for exactly who you are, right? Exactly as you are. And so, Cantor Niemi talked earlier about representation. I hope that maybe my ministry has sort of a twofold purpose. One, to remind people of their belovedness, that they are created in the divine image, and also perhaps have young queer folks now who kind of look at the landscape and recognize that there are more openly queer clergy than there were certainly when we were growing up. I mean, you were perhaps doing ministry maybe a little after that, but the landscape was much different for you. And you are a trailblazer. You are one of those. You are the representation for us. We looked to very few clergy at the time when we were growing up that were serving, and so thank you for all you've done. And I hope that that's
Somebody's got to be.
wise and an inspiration is how I will say that. And so thank you for being that trailblazer, and I hope that we can kind of together continue to be that representation for those who are coming of age now.
So just a point of information, for those of you who don't know, this year, the Central Conference of American Rabbis observed the 35th anniversary of our motion, 1990 in Seattle. I was very proud to have been able to be there with my 6-week-old son at the time, to vote on the motion that said that the Hebrew Union College would accept and ordain, and the CCIR would accept as members any openly gay and lesbian clergy. It's since been, we had, by the way, in previous years, voted to support gay and lesbian acceptance as members and blah, blah, blah. We had voted to accept civil marriage. It took us a little bit longer to get to the religious marriage piece of all of it, but it had been over a series of years, starting about 1984, when there was a resolution that was first brought to the Hebrew Union College and the CCAR, and then brought. So we celebrated 35 years, but we celebrated it in a very complicated way. And the way it was observed is that about 10 years ago or so now, and it did take place at the last biennial of the URJ in Chicago in 2019. Remember those old days? There was a program called the Clergy Monologues, which was really focused then on the ordination of women and the trials and tribulations of women rabbis. Well, this year we had the Clergy Monologues, the LGBTQIA edition. And it was so incredibly complicated, painful, and loving to sit and hear our colleagues' stories. I'm around long enough, because was here for all of these conversations, where I knew all these people, and I knew a lot of the background, but until you hear it and hear what they struggled with, from the professor who was refusing to sign anyone's ordination certificates if he knew that they were out, from my classmate who was terrified that if he and another person in our class were going to be finalists for the same job, that this other person had no fear about outing him because he was not allowed to be out. I mean, we all knew, but our professors didn't know because they were afraid that the professors could do. So the landscape has, it has radically changed, except where it hasn't. And that's the thing that we always have to remember when we sit in our little bubble here, that there's a lot that's going on out there that's a little different. So I just thought I'd throw in the context for all of that. Because even though we were early to it in the Reform movement, we had gay and lesbian synagogues before we had gay and lesbian out rabbis, by the way, which was a whole twist of fate in our movement. It's not been easy, and it's only publicly, openly out there for 35 years. Sally Priesen was ordained 53 years ago in 1972. So just historical context. So when we were talking earlier, Reverend Hazen told me a story about how she was voted in to be the senior pastor of her church. And I just think it's an amazing story because what is the age at which somebody can vote on the pastor in your church?
14. As soon as they're confirmed, they can vote as a member of the church.
So she was telling me this story, which you can tell better than I can, about what it felt like to see the 14-year-olds vote for you.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty powerful for these young, especially women, because I'm the first female in this position as well, but then to be an out female in this position, these kids were just like, oh my gosh, I get to vote for history. How many 14-year-olds get to vote for history? A change that big in history. They get to vote at school for something. So it was really cool, and I mean, they really were celebratory to be able to do that. So thank you.
Sure. And Reverend Schaefer, you told me the story about your ordination. Would you tell, because that's also very different for those of us raised in the Jewish community.
Specifically, which portion of the story
Well,
did you find
first,
interesting?
well, first that the church called you and then ordains you. I think that's.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Explain that. And that they chose, and you were the first one to be called who was out.
Yeah, so different Christian traditions have their own way of deciding ordination, and so it's complicated. With Baptists, and again, it depends on what kind of Baptist, but with the particular congregation I was serving, so the story goes, I applied to seminary, moved down there, I got a referral to, somebody asked me, can I pass on your name to this Baptist church? They're looking for a youth minister, and I thought, Baptist church, they know I'm gay? And they sure did. And so that was my first experience with Progressive Baptists. This was in Dallas, Texas, too, of all places. And so I had no intention of seeking ordination as a Baptist pastor. In fact, I thought, you know what, the UCC is going to be the easiest route for me. And then the more I was there and the more I got to know this congregation, I fell in love with the congregation. And then they asked me this question, could we ordain you? We would love to ordain you. It would be so meaningful to us. And so my ordination is not through any denomination. It is actually a local church ordination. And so this was a really meaningful moment for me because, yes, I was the first, but also because it was the service was put together with such love and care, and it was they were ordaining one of their own, and they were so proud, and it was a really meaningful moment for me.
So Cantor Niemi, you came out of a very different kind of ordination, and fortunately came at a time when having gay and lesbian cantors and rabbis was more ordinary, but it wasn't without its issues.
Would you like me to speak a
Yeah,
little bit on that?
yeah.
Yes, I mean, there's ways in which the landscape has changed and that it hasn't, but I do remember, I think it was maybe even in my my interview, one of my initial interviews at HUC when I was like about to enter seminary, that I said something along the lines of like, I think they were asking something like what, like reasons why I was going to HUC as opposed to other schools or something along those lines. And I talked a little bit about my gay identity at the time, and I said that, you know, and I didn't know as much about the history of the institution and how in the grand scheme of history, how relatively recently they had become more open and affirming of queer candidates. But I said something to the effect of like, this is a place where I know that it's not even a question that I would be able to be accepted, and that it's not, doesn't have to be like a big deal that I'm here, because I knew of many other out seminary students there at that time. I have a very dear friend and colleague who had been applying to multiple seminaries, and she told me that one of the reasons why she ended up at HUC is that when she had applied to one of the other seminaries, they were a little bit almost too excited that she was a gay candidate applying to their school, and she didn't want that to be the part, like the reason or the thing for her there. And so she ended up being my classmate and one of my closest friends. But throughout, it's been a lot easier, a lot less less of a question. Even and I hope that it's all right. But I remember during my application process here at Temple Beth El, one of the questions that was asked of me was if I would be comfortable officiating a gay wedding, with the subtext being that the hope was that I would answer yes. And to have that be the where the landscape that we're in now is really it should not be taken for granted. The fact that the demographic in this community has that so much of the impetus and the drive toward more LGBTQ inclusion and discussion in this community has been driven by parents who are incredibly supportive of their LGBTQ kids, I find so gratifying. And yet I also realize that we still have a lot of growth to do. I remember when I was coming up through seminary, there was only one all-gender restroom on the 4th floor in a back hallway across from the mail room. And the gay students went to the administration and said, oh, this is something that we need to address and take care of. So yeah, we're always growing.
Cantor Niemi next week, I believe, is teaching a class called God and Drag, or 2 weeks?
It's the last Thursday
in
June.
Last Thursday in June. Not that I want you to give away your class for everybody now, but I'm going to ask the same question of all three of you, is what's a way that you see, or a teaching that you've seen very differently through a queer lens than you think other people have seen or taught? Oh, okay. We'll let Reverend Schaefer have this, because.
Oh my gosh, let me think about this.
Oh, okay. Well, you also, I will also say that you also told me about how you've been inspired by teachings from both rabbinic texts, the Quran, and others too, to talk about intersectionality and learning. And so you can take this anywhere you want.
So there are certainly way smarter people in the room than I, and I hope I don't misrepresent other faith traditions' teachings. But I will say, actually, recently I was drawn to the story and preached on the story of Joseph, and what is translated in many of our translations as the sometimes as a robe or coat of many colors. But some queer theologians read into that, actually maybe the translation should be a princess dress. And yeah, have you heard this before?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I'm not way off base here?
No?
Okay.
I can fill in if you
Could you? Yes, that would be great. And it has some to do with the very specific translation, and I think the only other instance of this particular phrase is in reference to the king's daughters who wear the same type of garment. And also, you find in Islam, you see some writings that talk about, I believe, or maybe this was rabbis who wrote about this, Joseph wearing eyeliner, essentially makeup, eye makeup, and things like that. And so he is given, outside of our Christian tradition, he's often given these more maybe effeminate actions that he takes, right, or like identity. And so I wanted to question and explore a little bit about what would that mean if Joseph was queer, was non-binary, and would that have been the reason for the reaction by his brothers and father that led to him being sold into slavery. And so that was an interesting exploration that we did together as a congregation. I would love for you to fill in some of the gaps there.
So some folks might recall, it was like maybe I think like 2 or 3 years ago, I did a queer text study exclusively on the queerness of Joseph. And in rabbinic literature especially. So yes, all of the you got your citations all right there. But throughout, I think that I did a big build of like if there was any figure in the Hebrew Bible who would be like the most likely to be in some way outside of the gender or sexual orientation norms of the society in which they live, like the answer, at least according to rabbinic literature, would be hands down Joseph, no contest.
With an enabling father, interestingly.
Yes, and there's even more. I mean, there's multiple references, including that when Joseph was, there's like a beautiful midrash that like says that when Joseph was walking through the streets of Egypt as the Grand Vizier, that he was very good looking. He got his mother's looks, supposedly, and that all of the women of Egypt would try to throw shiny objects into the street to try to get his attention, and he would not pay any attention to them at all. And then, of course, there's the rejection of Potiphar's wife. There's a lot of reading into that as well. So yes, the queerness of Joseph and the garment that you described too. It's just, I think it's like 2 Samuel where it's described as being the garment worn by the daughters of kings.
Reverend Hazen.
I don't even remember what the question was, to be honest with you.
Talking about a queer lens on teaching Scripture.
Yeah, so I think the thing that I do this, actually, Tim has also done this down at the Crossing, where we've taken Scripture and we've looked at it through a Christian lens of what is this, could this be? We all know that this is not a new thing, right? We all know that LGBTQ happened centuries and centuries ago. We're all just people. So it's interesting to take that lens and lay it over our historical sacred texts and go, I wonder, could this have been something? And ask the questions. One of the things that I was moved by this. A trans clergy friend of mine came out to their clergy person. This was oodles and gobs of years ago, because remember, I'm old. And he was like the first in his tradition in that part of the country to come out and as trans and fully physically change. And when he went to his clergy person to explain what he was feeling, she said to him, and I just think this is beautiful, and I use it over and over and over, is that we were all made in God's image, male and female. And if there isn't a better understanding of trans than that, I don't know that we have one. Trans people understand the male and female. And what a gift. What a special understanding to have of being in God's image. And I'm always like, wow, wish I could do that. But there's a sense of that when I go back to the story that I told, that I thought God must have screwed up on me because I liked females. And so that it must, he got the wrong, at that point in time, I always called him he. I don't anymore. Got the wrong genes slipped into me, and I was going to have to deal with it. So to have that of male and female inside all of us, actually, and it just manifests itself in different ways, is pretty beautiful.
It's very beautiful. I was going to ask a different kind of question, but I think instead, Rabbi Protestant, do you want to, we'll turn it over and let our guests here ask a couple of questions. I have one more that we'll get to when we circle back, but.
So I guess if you have any questions and you just want to raise your hand, and once again, I'll ask you to be brief with your questions so we can certainly hear from our panelists.
I'm thinking about Reverend Hazen's comment, description of the 14-year-olds voting for.
Isn't that incredible?
Your selection, it is wonderful. And I'm wondering if each of you sees any generational differences in the attitudes of the members of your congregation as far as acceptance of differences.
Who wants to start?
I really don't, and I'm in granted, I'm in a very, very progressive congregation, but I think if there's any generational piece that I see, it's older people seem to get on board a little faster because they're like, really? That's a big deal? Why are we dealing with this? There's a whole lot more in the world we ought to be worried about. It seems if there is a little hesitation, it's often mid-range age, what I see, that are, I don't know, trying to kind of figure out where their place is in the world and who they ought to listen to and who not to listen to. But I will also say, just because I'm trying very hard not to be political here, but my concern right now is that we have a lot of hate being spewed in the media, and it gives permission for us to hate. And I think you all who are invested in this tonight, really have to be the louder voices to say, you don't have to listen to that. And you are loved, and you are valued, and you are respected for who you are.
Reverend Schaefer?
I'm going to say maybe yes and no. So on the one hand, I see more congregations with openly LGBTQIA pastors. That is something, I think, to acknowledge, that in some way things have changed over, decades. Slowly, but it's changing. And then on the other hand, I do a lot of advocacy at the state legislature. I find it really important for people of faith to come and speak in front of the legislature, especially when there are bills that want to take away people's rights. And especially right now, LGBTQ and especially I think trans children are a huge target in Wisconsin at the legislature. And so in that way, I'm seeing, wow, this is really no different than when I was growing up. These are the same kinds of bills that are being recycled and brought up year after year still today. And so there, maybe I'm seeing not as much of a change. And then yet again, let me flip. I'm also seeing more clergy and more folks from congregations coming and speaking to their faith values and coming to testify, which is really meaningful for the queer community who has often felt a lot of trauma, experienced a lot of trauma at the hands of religious communities, and I would say especially Christian faith communities. I think we're more guilty than most. in this way. And so I think it is really important for those messages of affirmation from people of faith specifically, because you have a room full of queer people who are testifying and telling their stories and being vulnerable, and they need to be affirmed, and I think they especially need to be affirmed by people of faith.
Cantor Niemi.
I won't add too much more, only because I said before a little bit of what I was noticing in this community about the demographics of really universal, like parents who are supporting their LGBTQ kids in our congregation have been among the driving forces of changes, at least in the time that I've been here and shortly before I arrived, and that just would not have been the case in my, the congregation that I grew up in, for example, where there was maybe like one out gay couple and nobody ever talked about it. And I think part of what if I notice a change now is that more people are just more comfortable talking about it now. What they end up saying, I think, might vary depending on like which space we're in. And I certainly see lots of echoes of the caricaturing of gay people that I saw in the 90s being directed toward trans and non-binary folks now. It seems that the playbook just doesn't really change that much. But the difference that I see is that there is just a well of voices, of countering voices. Coming from within faith communities and faith community leadership, and I still think again and again that should never be taken for granted. The tools that we now have at our disposal that we might not have had in a generation previous.
Other questions? We've got one in the back, and then we'll get used to.
Hi. So through our daughter, we have been exposed to her friends who have been rejected by their families. Won't talk to them, won't see them for years. And it's really sad to actually talk to these kids. And the question is, what do you say to them about why this is happening to them? It's usually religious families in conservative areas. And it's kind of mind-boggling that this is still happening in this country so much, that people are being thrown out of their families because of being just gay. And so how do you help those kids to deal with that loss?
Who wants to tackle that one first?
I'll start because I have the story that matches that. When I came out, I have a beautiful, ugly story about my coming out. In that town of 500, took my mom on a walk to tell her, but I had to tell her everything. I had to tell her everything about what I was going to tell her about, because she didn't know anything about gay, lesbian, trans. I mean, she just wouldn't have had that information. And so I had to explain all of that. And then, after we were finally almost back home, we sat on the steps of my home church. And I finally got it out. And I'm like 38 years old when I'm doing this, not a pup. And her words to me were, well, God made everybody, right? So it's okay. I love you. I mean, it was beautiful. And I said, okay, who's telling Dad? Because you tell me how we should do this. You know Dad better than I do. I can come back in a couple of weeks, which I really wanted to just leave it with Mom at that point. And she said, oh, let's just walk home and tell him. Like, oh, no, I wasn't quite prepared for this. But we did, and he said, the previous person you were with, I wouldn't have been okay, but I'm okay. I love who you're with. It's all good. And then I told my brother, and he has not talked to me since. So it runs the gamut, and it took, and he did not talk to my parents after that because they accepted me. And it was all based on religion. We were all going to hell. That's fine. I don't count on his judgment anyway, but wow, it's horrible. It's horrible to be rejected, to be with someone that you grew up with, that you loved, and thought they loved you, and it's just cut off completely. And it took me years. But what you all in this room, your job is to tell those kids that they're loved. And it doesn't make any difference. It does. And I'm just really sad for him now. I'm really sad for him because he's never met my kids. He never had a wonderful way to say goodbye to my parents. And I'm really sad for him. But wow, I mean, and I was an adult. I was an adult and had to deal with that, and it was hard. So you can imagine what a 10, 12, 13, 14, 18-year-old kid has to deal with when they're faced with that. So that's why we just have to keep saying, oh, honey, we got you. We got you. You are loved. You are valued. You are respected for who you are. You don't have to change. You don't have to change. Just another piece of that religious piece in there is that I was a sponsor for all 4 of my nephews, and my brother and sister-in-law actually went to the Lutheran minister to ask for my name to be removed from the baptismal certificates. That's how deep and ugly it can get, which thankfully they said, we can't change history. You know, that's what's on the document. We can't change history. But thank you for asking that question, and just know that, man, we just gotta swoop them up. We just gotta swoop them up.
Thank you.
Reverend Schaefer?
I think that's so important that there are those individual affirmations. And also, I would add to that, that's why a Pride Shabbat or a Pride service or hosting things like an Interfaith Trans Day of Remembrance service, as you've done, is so important, because that's also a public witness and a very public statement to queer folks that you are loved, you are valued. And I think even community advocacy, legislative advocacy, that kind of stuff is really important. Those things are live streamed. I will say I was surprised one time after a county board meeting when they were talking about becoming a trans-inclusive county, or what was that? Sort of a safe haven county, something like that. I said something that I thought was very basic and we could agree on, which is everybody is loved, everybody's humanity needs to be respected. This is something we should all be able to support. And I spoke to that a little bit from my faith values. And I got to the church the next day and checked my voicemail messages, and there was a person in tears that they had been watching the live stream and they had never heard a Christian pastor affirm trans people, and just wanted me to know how meaningful that was. So you'll never know who's listening when you do those acts of public witnessing. It can feel sometimes like you're beating your head against the wall and you're not actually accomplishing anything, but I promise you that people hear that, and I think those public affirmations are equally important.
Cantor Niemi?
The only thing I would add to that is the affirmations that person is still loved and valued and okay as they are in their fullness is so important, and they've experienced a loss in that moment. The loss of that relationship, I think also, I mean, in the story that you described, Reverend Hazen, made me think about what that moment of loss must have been like for you in that moment. And I think for anybody else too, like in the story, in the situation you're describing, to think about how you would comfort anybody if they had experienced some kind of loss. I think that needs to be brought into the way that you care for them as well.
And just remember, when you do it, you can literally be saving someone's life. Yeah.
How do you understand the resistance to affirmation or compassion or openness to difference? What do you see as being at the source of that, or if there is one? And the reason I think it's important is that depending on where the source is, how you're going to attack it or how you're going to change it may be different. Is it a matter of education? Is it a matter of witnessing, as you've talked about? I mean, that certainly is important. But still, there is so much resistance. And we're seeing now all around us resistance on many fronts, you know, to difference, to toleration of difference and affirmation and just love of people who are different. So how do you understand that? Is it the forces of evil, for example? I mean, if you think of in religious terms, you might think in those terms.
I'm going to say maybe not all three of you need to answer every question so we can get to all
Okay.
many questions.
I'll let you all. Really quickly, I will just say, I have come to understand that sometimes religion is twisted in the pursuit of controlling people. And I see, especially for Christians, this Christian nationalist movement that's happening now is, I'm not sure how much people really believe what they're saying, but it is a way to say, this is the one true interpretation of Scripture, you must believe this. And we're going to legislate based on that, and it is all for the purpose of controlling people. That's my view, and that's really hard to combat. And I think the only way we can is just to continue to share our truth and then say, that theology does not represent all of us. This is how we see it. You know, our theology is based on, you know, whatever it is that's meaningful for you, love of neighbor, whatever it is, and that's the best answer I've got. I'm sorry, that's not probably not going to solve all of the problems.
There's a couple people watching on the live stream, and if you have questions, you can just put them in the chat, and we'll be sure to ask them as well.
Thank you guys so much for doing this tonight. I was curious about, we've talked a lot about, or you guys have talked about the ways that faith can sort of meet the LGBT community and welcome and support, which is super important. And I'm also wondering what you see as the ways that the LGBT perspective, queer kind of ways of thinking have helped to open up faith in various traditions for people who identify as straight.
You want to talk about the broken heart? Breaking open the heart?
Well, one of the things that I think stories are so important to me, because when you hear someone's story, you are engaged with them. You are drawn in by, if you have any feelings at all, you're drawn in by their story. And so I think stories are important, and hearing, that's why I keep saying thank you, because hearing our stories, and what any individual in this room brings to their faith enriches another person's faith. I was telling you, when I went to seminary, it wasn't just a Christian seminary, it wasn't just a UCC seminary, we had everything. And so hearing other people's faith journey, I either went, oh man, I can't go down that road, or wow, I think I need to consider that in my own theology. And so I think that people who are LGBTQ who come into faith communities, if their story is heard, then your faith, if you're not in that category, is enriched too, because you start thinking about, oh, well, you were just talking about Joseph. You know, there's a different, oh, really? Joseph, let's talk about Joseph. So, and what she's referring to about the broken open is that I've seen grandparents, parents who find out that their child is LGBTQ. And instead of having a broken heart, I would like people to understand that they're actually just broken open. To be able to understand more, to be able to walk with and alongside whatever it is. We would do that if somebody had a cancer diagnosis, wouldn't we? Wouldn't we all do that? We would be broken open by it. And it's the same, it's not a disease, but it's something that people are feeling and walking and struggling with, and we would want to walk with them. And so if parents, friends, everybody could feel their heart broken open instead of broken and falling apart and never being able to put back together again, that we might have a better way to receive someone else's theology. Sorry that was so long.
Anybody else want to respond?
I already talked a little bit about the Revelation thing.
Okay. Any?
Other questions?
You got one right next to you.
So my background is I grew up in basically a Southern Baptist Convention church, and Tim knows me. Hi, Tim. So I'm currently queer and in seminary, and my question is, like, how have you responded, or, like, do you even respond when someone invalidates your faith because of your sexuality? Because it has already happened to me, and I've only been in seminary, like, 1 year, 2 years, almost 2 years, so is there a way that you guys have responded to that, to somebody who invalidates your faith because of your sexuality?
I think that's a great question, and yes. And this was something we talked about a little bit too. I had to come to the terms that bantying Bible verses with people wasn't going to work. Because I had everything stocked up. You know, I'd done my research. I can study well if I need to. And I could banty back and forth verses, and you've lost the conversation. Nobody's going to hear you at that point. And so I had to just say, I think we're seeing that different theologically, and that's okay. That is okay. And you can hold that theology, and more power to you, and I can hold my theology, and I can move forward with that. So if I just don't let them take that power away from you, because as my Old Testament professor, my 2-year-old used to go to Old Testament class with me, and he's now 24. And one time she asked a question, tell me what your theology says, to a student. And the student goes, I don't have a theology on that. And she goes, oh, yes, you do have a theology on that. Even Spencer, sitting over there in the corner, has theology, because we all have a belief about God in some way, whether it's can't believe it. So don't let anybody invalidate your theology.
Any other questions online or anywhere?
Does anybody else want to respond to that question? She said it better than I. All right, a couple other questions. Yeah, Betsy.
One more?
I wanted to go back to Marta's question, that she shared that in loving their daughter, they find that other kids, or young people, have not been. And forgive me if you're saying this, I guess, but to only say to these kids, well, you are loved, it's not really, I don't feel like it's, I don't know, if somebody said to me, my parents rejected me, and I don't have any contact with them once I came out, I think that bare minimum, I should tell them they're loved, right? But what do I tell them? And I think that's what maybe Marta was asking. It's not my place to say your parents are so wrong, or the devil incarnate, or whatever. But and maybe Rabbi Prosnit has dealt with this too, with kids who come to him or something and rejection, but what more can I say about why their parents feel this way, or how I can comfort them about their parents' reaction? Say more, I guess. Is what I meant.
I'll say a little bit. I might ask for. I'll say a little bit, but I might ask for backup. I'm going to go back a little bit to what I said before, that to always have in mind that when you're in a situation like that, that you are comforting somebody who's experienced a loss, and we think about the ways in which sometimes we're just not able to answer questions or fix things when somebody's had a loss. Sometimes the only thing we can actually do is just be there with them and be a little bit broken with them, and hope that that's enough. It's hard because I don't think that I don't think that there's many situations where you can necessarily be expected to explain their the behavior of the loved one who rejected them. Or even to tell them that it's going to be okay, because how can you know that? And so it's not. I don't think it's just a matter of like a platitude of your loved. I think you have to actually show it by allowing their pain to just be, and to be there with them in that moment, and to stay with them and not abandon them.
I'm dying to add just a sentence to that.
Oh, well, I want to say that what you do by doing that is you make yourself a safe place. And so you can't take it away, you can't make it better, and they're going to hurt as deep as they have to hurt at any moment, but you have set yourself up as a safe place, and that's huge.
I obviously can't speak for the Christian community, but I certainly know that, for Jews that have been rejected by their family, and often more traditional Jews, it's the love, but it's also the home. And I would actually respond to the question about the seminary in the same way. Like, there is a home for you. Like, it might be hard to get there, but there is a spiritual home for you as well. Whether it's a church or whether it's a community. And I know from my friends that grew up in more traditional Jewish communities that ended up coming out and rejected by their families, when they found organizations like Footsteps or Keshet, like that, it was the idea of not only feeling loved, but truly finding home. Like the idea of bayit, like in Hebrew, like what does that actually respond to? So, yeah. All right, do we have?
So we had one final question because I wanted you to hear what the answer they gave me. So I thought everybody should hear it. So one of the questions I asked was, what is it that you would like people to leave with? What's an action? Because this is Pride Month, and it's wonderful that we celebrate, but we also have to do. So I asked them all to reflect on that a little bit, and Jacob, being Cantor Jacob Niemi, sent me several pages and articles, which we can share because it's magnificent lists of things. But there's more. So we're going to end on that because I want to end on the high note of also getting us to remember we may be Madison, but we're still in the state of Wisconsin. And it's not all hunky-dory everywhere. And whatever love we have in this room is not always shared when we go out. So I want to end with us talking about that call to action. Then we have another poem, and then we have a piece of music from Cantor Niemi. So who would like to start?
Okay, I can put the list together. Could I?
I was
refer to my.
I will be your Vanna White Dog.
I remember what I wrote is the problem here. So I kind of, and you all are welcome to like take you know, we have the sheets that were available. They were as you walked in. I think that among the things are like, sometimes it can feel like our actions are insignificant commensurate to like what's going on in the country, what's going on in the world. Always, always, always the building of relationships within community is never, is always worthwhile, is always worth the time and the effort, and always matters. So when we think about, you know, our Madison community, the ways in which we're building relationships, building ties, to support local LGBTQ organizations like Outreach, or I think I put a plug in here even for like the weekend that we're having our Pride Shabbat services is also the weekend of like the big gay Pride Market, which is like a really cool thing that happens in Madison. If you don't know about it, it's a way of supporting local LGBTQ artists and artisans and businesses. There's so many ways that we can be aware of what's going on. There was I wrote that just recently I didn't know that there was an LGBTQ caucus in our state legislature, and they just proposed a 2025 equality agenda. So I'm constantly trying to make sure that I'm up on what's going on locally and in the state. And so the list is here, but it's not exhaustive. The most important thing that we can do is be in dialogue and in communication with one another.
I think this is a great list, and I would add one thing, and it seems really simple, but when I drive around my neighborhood and I see a pride flag on a house, or I'm in a space, right? Because as a gay person, I'm always a bit protective of who I am. I don't necessarily out myself automatically. I don't know who I'm around, and I don't know who I'm safe around. But something as simple as a pin, sometimes workplaces now do these lanyards, rainbow glasses, dresses. I think they immediately signal to someone who is queer that that is a safe person. And don't discount that. It's very simple, but it's actually really meaningful. I know that I often am very just tense in new situations around new people because I don't know what to expect, and that immediately calms my nerves.
You're gay? I didn't know that.
That's my daily coming out.
Again, I want to say thank you for being here. And I want you to feel empowered. I want you to go away from tonight saying, wow, I hadn't thought of it that way, or I could be more engaged. I could put a flag out front. Oh, that's a little bit pushy for me, but what I want you to feel empowered. I want you to know that you can make a difference. That's what I want you to take away from tonight, because you all can and will, with everything that you take in and with your intentionality and with your power. And one thing I just want to remind you that sometimes if you are not gay, you are the ones that can have the conversations with the people to say, you know what, I know Tim, I know Cantor, and I don't think you've quite got the story right. You all who are allies have really big power. You just don't know you're holding it.
Privilege is a wonderful thing when we use it the right way. I just have to tell you one funny story about my glasses. I bought the glasses because they match all my outfits. I didn't think about what it meant to other people until people started telling me their coming out stories. The grandmas told me about their kids, everybody, and then I realized, oh, I didn't know that that's what it was signaling to people. So now I purposely wear them because now I know that it means to people that they can come and talk to me. But it was not, I wish I had been that smart up front. So we're going to end with another poem from Mishkan Ge'eva. It was written in 2019. The reason I mention the dates is that there's some poems in here that are very early in the genesis of gay and lesbian pride in Jewish life. And there's some that are much more recent. I think the difference in tone and history is important for these authors. So this poem is written by Dave Yadid, now Rabbi Dave Yadid, and it's called We Have Always Been. I look back into history, poring over our texts, sacred and profane, searching for some kind of opening where I can see myself, where I can see us. I search and find rejection from our communities and leaders, our existence hidden, shamed, criminalized, excommunicated, jailed, and killed. I keep searching and catch a glimpse of our vitality, our desire, our love, our bliss, our rebellion, our chosen family. In these glimpses, I see a sliver of light pouring out of the opening. I sprint toward it, our past, our present, our future, and with all my might, break the door off its hinges. I pant, breathless, on the other side. I want to scream, but instead I whisper, we are here. We are here. We have always been.
So I'll ask everyone to stand, and many thanks to, I'll use your first names, Paula, Eldonna, Tim, and Jacob. I'll take this opportunity just to offer you all a blessing on behalf, we're in our sanctuary. We'll say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One of Blessing. Bless these wonderful faith leaders who add joy and spirit and courage to our community here in Madison and beyond this city. May God always watch over you, and know that you, as you spoke about tonight, are created in God's divine image, and the light that you bring radiates throughout others and radiates throughout the world. We can all say, Amen. And we'll sing together.